And we're on the farm of Ian Gibson at Broughshane. And Ian was one of the original trialists for the agroforestry trial which he set up at Loughgall first of all in 1989, 90, and then 1 year later we planted these trees here. If you remember, when we looked at the Loughgall site, we were left with the ash trees there. Where we planted sycamore and ash at Loughgall, but the sycamore did not do well at all. Whereas here in this environment, the sycamore did well. We didn't plant ash because this was a different farm. It's a hill farm. We're up here 750 feet above sea level, and we have more challenging soil. And sycamore was a tree that we trialled here. So this was ran as a research trial with replicate plots of different spacings of sycamore and so on. And Ian managed the sheep on it, and we did all the full set of measurements, and we have the data from the early years of it. Then eventually, when the funding for the research ran out, and we were just able to keep the Loughgall site going because it was on a farm, and really we just handed this one back to Ian to continue to manage within his own farm structure. So maybe you just, first of all, your overall opinions of agroforestry in this site. Do you think it has brought a benefit, or what way would you use it?
To look at it, it looks well. It looks well from the road, and when you travel along the main road there and look across, it looks like woodland and the stock through it. It provides shelter for the stock, and recently in that warm weather, great for shade. Amazing how many animals were through the daytime were in below the trees, but hardly any animal out grazing at all, especially the sheep. We do cut thin the timber. We use it in the house for heating, but it's been an asset, and you also think you've done a wee bit for conservation. Yeah. And we have a very good 20 years ago there was a survey done, and we have a very diverse warbler population in the summertime. In fact, they said there were 6 different types of warblers to be found in this agroforestry site and a woodland site just across the burn from it.
So in terms of the soil, do you think it has kept it drier, improved it, makes it easier?
I think the soil definitely under the trees in the planted area would be drier than in the open farmyard area, farmland. And
you have both sheep and cattle on here?
Yeah, the first obviously the trees were small and they were in tubes. We didn't let cattle in near them, but in the last 4 or 5 years we've allowed cattle to come in here and graze in the summer.
Right.
They have grazed off a few of the lower leaves and branches, but they've done, I think they've helped open the whole canopy out.
Another good benefit, they've proven now that cattle grazing leaves and bits of branches reduces their methane emissions substantially. Right. So you're doing a bit for the environment in that way.
Doing it.
Yeah, they are, the cattle are.
Accidental.
Yeah, accidental.
But I'll take any credit going.
Yeah. So like in terms of the carbon footprint in your farm, this would be it's a high organic matter soil. It's not a pure peat.
No, no, it's not peat.
But it's an organic soil, and but it's a fairly shallow.
It's very shallow. That's right. Yeah, that's why our farm suffered so much from drought recently there.
Yeah. And you didn't notice any grass reduction in the dry spell under the tree?
No, in this area, no, there was never any. No. For some reason, it seemed to survive the drought much better. Probably the shade effect of the trees. Yeah. Helped things a lot.
This sort of space in here, we have about 100 trees to the hectare, and this would be, we would see this as a sort of final spacing. In other words, when these were planted at that density, that's what you'd aim to keep at. I mean, the department's recommendation is 400 trees per hectare, thinning down and picking out your trees, eventually ending up with something like this. So, if you like, right from year one, this has been an agroforestry plot that is established at its final density. And you know, I mean, okay, if the trees had been pruned, if you'd been wanting to produce tall, straight timber in this situation, you could have put a lot of effort into pruning them and maybe use different types of trees and so on. But they're really doing the purpose, which is they're bringing sort of health to the soil. They're improving the soil biodiversity. We're going to shortly take some soil carbon measurements here just to see how they have, like was done at Loughgall, where it's shown to be beneficial. And as Ian says, it's brought a lot of biodiversity to the site. What do your neighbours think of it? Say now and 30 years ago, was there any? Well, maybe there's no examples.
I'm not asking, but I know some of my neighbours locally thought I was deranged. Not even putting it politely. When I started off, that's a lot of good dry hill land ruined with trees.
Yeah.
Probably people with wetter farms.
Yeah. Maybe now some of them have a different idea if they were
Oh yeah, I mean the younger people now are much more clued into biodiversity and ecological patterns in the countryside.
Yeah. And I know you farm with your son here now. What would he have what would his thoughts be on these trees? He just takes them as part of life.
The two sons now are both at home.
Both of them, yes,
and,
all right.
They wouldn't be just big tree people. I've maybe too much of a tree hugger in my youth, so it wasn't too hard to convince to plant trees on the farm. I did plant earlier on Sitka spruce, and of course I was doing what everybody else was doing, the department was doing, and commercial forestry was doing, and we now see that was an ecological disaster. But I've all my Sitka spruce cleared now.
And all your timber's now in this?
Timber, most of the timber on the farm, is in this site here, all sycamore and a bit of ash.
Yeah.
Larch, European larch.
Yeah.
There's a few oak trees and a few beech.
And would you say, I mean, the key is to match the tree to the site?
Yeah.
And I mean, sycamore grows well in this.
Sycamore grows well in this exposed site. They definitely have suited the environment up here anyway. They coped well with it, except for maybe a few areas that are a bit waterlogged. They didn't do so well in it. They must have free draining land, the sycamore. Yeah. That's probably why it's done well in this fairly steep bit of the farm here.
And all mostly blackface sheep on the farm?
We have, it was, when we started off 30 years ago, it was all blackface.
Yeah.
Now there are very few blackfaces. They're all crossbred sheep, mostly hybrid sheep.
Yeah.
Cambridge and Belclares and Clyn crosses. Nearly all Texel rams used, except for getting some replacements.
And they're all no difference in how they reacted to the trees?
No.
Or just
no, there don't seem to be very many problems.
Yeah, and
the hares would be, even in the winter time, would come off the hill and come down in here, and they would try and damage the bark at the base of the trees. They would still.
Would they, even when they're big trees?
Big trees, they would still scrape away at it.
Yeah.
There's other scraping. Sometimes think it's badgers. And
yeah.
We have a few grey squirrels through the wood in the winter time, but it doesn't. There are not a lot of squirrels in this country. But
it definitely has improved the bird population.
Oh, the bird population, yeah.
I remember we did some measurements on sort of proper science. I remember Larry Toole used to do his bird counts up here, and we found really a rich. The trees attracted a big diversity of birds to this fairly open landscape. So, in terms of the tree canopy, then, I mean, there is the argument among farmers that the trees will reduce the grass production, and you know, we saw at Loughgall there, we were maybe down to about 70%, 60% grass production as the canopy closed, and then we opened it up. But I mean, looking about here, what's your view on and over the life of the plots? Do you see a significant loss in grass through it, or none at all?
Well, I haven't noticed very much difference in the amount of grass growing below the trees. This area now hasn't been heavily stocked this summer, and there's a lot of grass on it at the moment. But you can always manipulate. I mean, if you think the canopy is getting too closed over, and there's not a lot of light being cut out, you can always remove trees and turn them into firewood or whatever.
Or remove branches of trees.
Yeah, you can. You can remove a lot of the lower branches, the bigger branches, and you can always increase the amount of light getting in to the trees.
And sycamore is a fairly dense shade caster.
It is. Yeah, and below the sycamore.
Yeah.
There's pure woodland plots in there. You can see down there. It's there's not much light ever gets through at the bottom.
Yeah.
A lot of primroses in there in the springtime, and then I don't know.
Not much.
Then the whole thing just darkens down.
And I'd make the same point as we made in the Loughgall. This was a trial at the start, so we've got the same type of trees right throughout it, and we've got, you know, uniform spacings. There'll be nothing to stop you planting a mixture of trees, diversity of trees, which you could encourage pollinators and birds, you know, and you could use a range of tree species that were adapted to here. You don't have to plant them in straight rows. You could plant them in, you know, contour around the hill if you wanted to. But I mean, it is a grassland system, so initially anyway you had to be able to run up and down and maybe spread slurry, spread fertiliser, top weeds or whatever. So it's having Monroes generally most farmers would favour. Would that be your opinion, Ian? That would be the way that...
Yes, it would be definitely in rows. It's much easier to spray weeds, which is a problem maybe early on in the establishment, and to sow fertiliser. And we did, in one very wet autumn, remove a few rows of trees and put the spread slurry on this land in late September, because our tanks, we just no other way of getting rid of it at the time, usefully. Yeah. So it did a good job. And as any farmer would know, ground that's never been slurried before is less likely to become soft in the top as the stuff that's slurried 3 times a year.
And you had the root network below it too.
And the root network and the trees. The ground below the trees was so much drier because there's so much moisture is removed even in a wet summer here, up into the leaves and up into the atmosphere.
Talking about the flexibility and the canopy of the trees and the shade they cast, well, what Ian has done here is remove every 3rd row of trees, and it's opened up the canopy, it's let grass in, and it's allowed him access to go through. For example, he was able to put slurry on, going up this passageway. It had no effect on the trees, the ground. Because of the tree roots, the ground was able to carry the tanker, and it had absolutely no effect on it. And it's allowed more grass in. And I think maybe I mentioned earlier in Loughgall, in the early days whenever we had farmers coming to visit the site, one of the things they said that they liked about it was the flexibility of an agroforestry. It's not like forestry system in itself. One farmer, he said, if he planted trees on his farm in a woodland plot or in a forest, that's it tied up for 50 years or 60 years. But if he had put in agroforestry, come year 12 or 13, he could have made a decision. He could have looked at what was the future ahead, because the canopy would start to close, and then he could decide if he wanted to boost his sheep production again. He could take out every other row, he could thin out and let the light back in and let it go up. Or if it looked like the market for timber was going to go through the roof, or there was more demand for growing trees for timber, then he could just let the canopy continue to develop and the livestock component go down. And you could make that decision several times throughout the lifetime of the crop, of the canopy. Just like Ian has done here, he has removed a row of trees and it's just given it a completely different aspect to it. It's given a completely different set of outputs. Because one of the things, I would never envisage agroforestry as being in a clear fell situation. I think what you could do here again, you could remove some trees and then you could replant more. So you could end up with an uneven aged canopy. You could have different species. It's flexibility once again, but it's still giving you the environmental benefits. It's still improving the soil quality. It's encouraging the range of wildlife, the birds and the biodiversity. But it's most importantly, it's allowing you to continue to farm the land and to produce food from this type of land, while at the same time sustainably, and delivering carbon storage, clean water, extending the length of the grazing season if you can keep your animals out longer, reducing your ammonia emissions, all of those benefits at the same time. Ian, further back down there, we were talking about the grass just getting a bit thinner under the trees when the canopy started to close, and we can see that well illustrated in this field here. What's your plans to do with those trees in there, if you like, to try and get the sward back up again? Or
as Jim was saying there, it's very dark under some of those trees, and their areas now becoming bare and very little grass on them. So this winter we plan to take maybe a third of these trees out, probably maybe a row, and then a few of the lesser trees in them, the trees that are producing less timber. But the main idea is to thin it out, let more light in. This up at this end of the canopy, there's much more grass below it, although that's as the south end side of it. The sun gets in there more, but in this area in here, in the centre, there's very little light and it needs thinned out to increase grass production.
Yeah. And then the cows, would they, like you have they have an open space beside the trees, which sort of, once again, illustrates the flexibility of the system. So would you see the cows would just can go in under the trees even at night or in bad weather and move in and out? It's using trees in that way, like in a more flexible way on the farm.
Well, the cattle are free to roam. Just a few weeks ago in the warm weather in July, it was in here for shade. And probably in very wet, stormy days, they come in here for shelter from the wind and rain. We found that today when we were walking through the paddocks there, that there was a lot of shelter. You get into the denser tree paddocks, the showers of rain were virtually unnoticeable.
Yeah.
So the cattle appreciate that too.
And I notice the canopy is just dead level down. It's just something at the height that those animals can graze at. So they are eating a lot of the leaves and nipping them off. And I say we know that's good for methane reduction in animals if they're eating those leaves. So they're just keeping it at a nice height. Now, if you had taller cows, you'd have a higher canopy maybe. But
we used to have a lot of Solera cows, and they graze higher. And the Dexters would they'd be much lower.
But the Galloway seem they're a good breed for it. They're good for this land and good for this type of environment at the end of the day. But just thinking, sort of to finish on that, just the benefits for soil health that these trees are bringing, it's completely different. The soil in there is completely different. How we know, we've taken measurements of there's more worms, there's more insects, there's more soil flora, and it's generally just adding to the whole improvement in the biodiversity and this soil and this type of environment. And it's giving diversity on the farm. It's improving the carbon count, the carbon storage facility on the farm. It's delivering animal health benefits and all those sort of ecosystem services, as well as, to come back to it once again, it's enabling somebody to make a living from the land, which is important too. You want to get... Well, we've had a great day's filming around 3 farms in the Antrim Plateau, and I just want to thank you, Ian, for having us on your farm, showing us agroforestry. Yours is the oldest plot, and you and me are the oldest 2 here, I suppose. But he and I we went to Queen's together, and we did agricultural botany together, and I did most of my PhD on the back of this hill on grazing clover. So we stuck together a while, and these trees are maybe one of the legacies of that too. At least he didn't pull them out when we left. So thank you very much.
No,
it's great to see it. It's lovely to see this example. As I think I pointed out, I mean, Loch Gall is officially the oldest still in existence agroforestry trial in Europe, and this is only a year younger than Loch Gall. So this is really a great example. 30-year-old agroforestry system. Was pointing out the trees are healthy and well. Okay, they're not tall forest giants, but they're doing their job. They do what we want them to do in this environment, and that's a tribute to yourself. So thank you very much.